Good evening, everyone. All right, very good, very good. And good evening those who are online. Welcome to the session 3, the last night of our Healthy Grieving training. This doesn't end what we're trying to do with the Healthy Grieving. I know, especially for GraceCrossing, sometime in the coming weeks, we're going to sit, care team, myself, however we work it out, pastor, and talk about how to develop the program more. And as I've said earlier, and I'll say again, I know I've spoken it to Pete and Lauren and Linda, from other congregations, maybe represented online, that if you want to go further in terms of developing a Healthy Grieving Encouragers team, then we want to help you with that. And please email to us or to the church, either way, depending on what information that you have on that, either to Hope and Help Network or to the church email that you've been getting, and let us know, and we can go forward with that. But as I've been saying to a couple of people, not for the next 4 days, because the next 4 days I'm going to be in the Adirondack Mountains, hopefully looking at colorful, beautiful leaves and relaxing in what's probably going to be 50-degree or less weather. But okay, so for tonight, want to start again by saying, and this applies to tonight, especially other nights as well, that that we're going to we have open sharing time, in a couple of minutes to see anybody wants to share something that as we said before, you're welcome to participate or not. We're not going to go around you next. Never agreed with that. Once again, respect other people's opinions, and I don't think anybody's going up saying, no, that's wrong, you didn't have that grief. So you didn't feel that pain. So I think what we have doesn't apply to this, but it may be. And confidentiality is a priority, of course, and what's said here remains in the group, and everyone says, I'm just reading what we have, down, because this is used as kind of a template. In other places, no one takes up all the time, and I don't think we'll have that issue. Allow others to share. As we said before, I'll say this time, turn your cell phones off. I'm going to check mine, but I think I did that earlier. Silent on. So, okay. Please, encourage you not to text or surf, during the meeting. And respect each other and listens. And lastly, as we've been saying, I think it's important each week, if you get overwhelmed by, any, we've been talking about triggers a lot, right? If you get overwhelmed by any trigger, please feel free to get up and go out and get some water to sit. If you need help, if you'd like to have somebody come and sit with you, when you go out, go to that door and just say, help. And one of us will go out, and sit and share. And as we've said before, that can happen. That triggering can happen. Okay, so we're going to spend a little time now on those SAG worksheets. So if you have your folder with you, if you want to get those out. And again, those at home, I want to, I guess the word is apologize. I want to apologize or explain, and to everybody else as well, but especially those at home listening, is that our original plan and intention was for the manuals, which are available, to be available by last week. And then we were going to either mail or drive around and get to those at home. But that's something we weren't able to do. The printer wasn't able to do that. It got extended. But we're going to give those manuals to you. If you've been, if you've been to at least 2 of the 3 sessions and you've been working on the different documents or want to work on the documents, if you weren't able to print them out, then you weren't able to work on them, sorry. But then please, again, let us know, by email otherwise, and get an address and we'll mail or get them to you in one way or another. We'll look over the list and see. If somebody's close, we'll maybe just drop it by. But didn't want anybody to feel excluded, and we're sorry that didn't work out that way. But this is what we're looking at, that sorrow and anger and guilt worksheet, that molecule of grief, as we've kind of been calling it. As we said again, this may not be the best format. What we're hoping, that each church, as it develops its healthy grieving program, will maybe begin to have, as we did at Willow Grove for a while, and Abington, back and forth between two churches, where there'll be like a monthly meeting or every other week meeting, and kind of small group kind of meeting where people can share or not share, but led by people who have gone through the program and use the manual for that. But in this training, we did want to make sure that we gave time for that. So once again, if you're comfortable, you can do so. So looking at the first sheet there, identifying my sorrow, anger, and guilt worksheet, and those 4 different sets of questions actually. But did anybody have anything in there? Did you get a chance to fill it out? Anybody have anything they'd like to share with others? Yes, please, Nancy. Okay. Yes. Hmm. Mm. Yeah, so that was hoped for, but didn't happen exactly the way you thought it was going to. Okay. Anyone else? Lloyd, please. Ah. No. Ronnie gives the commentary. Huh? Okay. You want Ozzie and Harriet, right? There you go. There you go. Anyone else? Okay. And again, I've repeated a lot of things, but some things bear repeating, because that helps, is that in my estimation, and I think the team feels the same way too, but I'm just speaking for myself, in my estimation, the best use of this is, and the way I've used it mostly, is to, have somebody fill it out, and then they've sat with me, and we've gone over it, and we've, talked across the table, cup of coffee or whatever, and just, and shared that, So I say that to you because, remember, I for invite, who might you invite? This may not be the place to share that, but if you've worked on this or if you haven't, please go ahead and do it. And think, who could you invite to sit with you and you with them to go over it, And I also want you to be thinking, as we've been saying all along, is that, maybe you could be that person, that healthy grieving encourager like we talked about, because you've gone through the training. You don't have to be a part of a team, but maybe you're, unbeknownst to you, in a couple of weeks, you're talking across your back fence to your neighbor, and the neighbor shares about some very difficult times that they've been going through, and you say, would you be interested in going over a manual about grief or looking at it? And they might say, well, anything that would help, and then you get one to them, We're going to make them available to order off of our Healthy Hope and Help Network site. But, then you might be able to sit down with them. You just don't know. You just don't know. You might say, oh, I can never do that, but you never know. Okay, next, anger. Did anybody have anything in the anger section? I'm angry at so-and-so, and maybe that's not something you want to share publicly, whatever, but, or I'm angry at myself, or whatever that may be. No? Okay, guilt? Okay, there we go. So very like guilt for 500, please. No. Mm. 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 That's a tough thing. Real tough. Mm. Okay. Well, stepping off on that, unless there was somebody else that had anything in that. So, again, the idea here was to identify, right? To feel your feelings, as we were talking about, to be open to self-assess in some way using some tool, some resource, right? But not to just end there, not to just write it down, right? So that's when we went, if you have your manuals, that's when we went to that next page 35, if everybody turned your manuals. Everybody get one? Okay, good. So, again, for you people at home, this is part of what we emailed last week, the follow-up to SAG worksheet, where we talked about 4 tasks for lightening grief's load, which were forgiveness, be grateful, celebrate, and letting go. So, these were important tasks to do, and that the idea was to take what we did in our sorrow and our anger and our guilt, and then apply that to it. Just to to kind of filter it through and to see what we have without ask the Lord's help for that, to walk with us in that, and to be there with us. I was going to share this a little later, but I think that even with this, there's a wonderful passage in Psalm 139 where he says, try me, Lord, or test me, Lord. Search me, really, he says, to see if there be any, and he uses the phrase untoward in the King James, or wicked way, But once again, if you remember me talking about the 4th and 5th steps of the recovery program. So in the original recovery program, it says that to do a searching and fearless moral inventory. But remember, we said grief-wise, we're saying, and that's basically things I did wrong. But now we're saying do a searching and fearless grief inventory, which a lot of times is what was done wrong to us, right? Well, in the same way, when we think of that Psalm 139 and say, search me, Lord, we can say, Lord, go with me. Help me search, Lord, to see if there be any deep hurt in me, to see if there be any unhealed grief in me, because, and God will do that and will help us open up. So, I really encourage you to do that. So, as I mentioned earlier, I've had some wonderful times in this past few years of sitting down with people and having them do this, and then sitting and talk with them. I did this many, many months ago with a fellow named Eric, who was a part of this congregation and who lives upstate a little bit now. And, got to say on the day I preached here a little thing that Eric said about how it was helpful to him, and he didn't realize, how much he needed to do this. But I did this also recently with Gary Carter, and we had some wonderful times sitting, after church sometimes or other times, and he did these worksheets, and then we went over them together. And I asked Gary that day after we went over them, I said, Gary, this is some powerful stuff going on. Do you feel that you would be comfortable in sharing that with, a group of people? And he said, yes, I would. So without any further ado, as they say, Gary, if you'd come forward and just share just a little bit he's going to share a little bit of his, I guess, what he felt like in the process, but mainly some of the results for his forgive, be grateful, celebrate, and let go.
Well, hi, I'm Gary. I was going to bring my brown paper bag to put over my head so you wouldn't know who I was, but cat's out of the bag. Dina. Hi, Dina. I do. Well, as was said just a moment ago, I and Tony worked through this for me about a month and a half, maybe 2 months ago, and it really was a blessing to go fearlessly into this. He wanted me to talk about the being grateful, the celebrate and letting go sections, so I will. Grateful. I remember saying that I was grateful for, honestly, all of you and for the place that Christ has in my life. I'm just being really great, because I tried to think how much in my life would be different had I never become a Christian. And it's almost impossible to say. I probably wouldn't be in Pennsylvania. I don't know where I would be. In so much of my life, and it should be, has been informed and influenced by following Jesus' call. Now, what was surprising to me was the next section, which was celebrate. And it says, to celebrate is to go beyond just being grateful. It is to acknowledge that something very special and worthy of some unique honor. Is very special and worthy of some unique honor. All right, so immediately what came to my mind when I got to this, and I was going through a very difficult passage when I was working on this, was meeting and marrying my wife, Lucy. And honestly, it should not have, but it took me by surprise. And I reflected on that, and what came to me is that I met my wife somewhere in 2009. She's better with the dates than I am. And we didn't get married until 2016. And it was a really harrowing journey, up and down and in and out and on and off. And I tell people it's one of the miracles in my life that I met, and then I finally married my wife. And that I am truly grateful for. It was one of those moments where I really felt, and maybe you've been like this in your life, where you really feel like God is good and he does love me because he's done such a wonderful thing that I could never have done for myself. I could not have made my relationship happen and dragged that woman down the aisle and all of those things. And then the next thing, becoming my daughter Ruby's father. Just a tremendous, tremendous blessing. And I celebrate that. And it really made me stop and appreciate them just a little bit more, as much as I love them already. And there's something about coming to that knowledge that you love someone, that you're grateful for them, and that you can celebrate what has passed between you and the relationship you have. It makes you feel a little more free. And that's exactly how I felt when I got to that. So that was truly surprising to me, that was there, and I didn't know how deep it was there. But to be honest, the other stuff, when we got to the anger, the guilt, the sorrow, those things kind of took me back too. And it was interesting to take all those things out, write them down, and look at them. But I want you to know that if you continue through this process, if you haven't yet, once you get to being grateful and celebrating and letting go, you might be just as surprised as I was, and hopefully as blessed. Thank you.
Good. All right. No, good. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Gary, so much, so much. Okay, so next I want to direct your attention, I'm watching my notes here, to what would be page, well, before we go any further, did anybody have anything filled out in there that they might want to share with the larger group? And that would be page 37, but you would have, it would have been the sheets that you got last week. You didn't have the manual last week, so and it was a different page number. I'm not sure what, but it would have been, it would have been basically the follow-up to SAG worksheet, and where it has grateful, celebrate, letting go, and I guess really forgiveness begins on the page right before that. Anyone? Nadine, please. Yes, I know that. Mm. Yes. Hmm. Okay. Hmm. 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 Yes. Yes. Oh yeah. Yes. 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 Mm. Oh. Mm. Mm. No. Hmm. Mm. There you go. There's your, there's your, gr- there's your grateful. Sorry. Oh, very good. Nice. Sorry. Yeah, there you go. People come, people get sent. Well, just to pick up on, now you had said Nadine to me before, but you go by Dina? Okay, well then it'll be Dina. So, I want to make a point stepping on what Dina said, and this is really important. And I said, when we put this together, we realized that, it would have to be 10,852 pages if it was going to include everything there is. And we said, well, what is our purpose? And our purpose, above all, was to be a stepping off point, was to lay down in hopefully understandable form and with some worksheets and graphics that you'll see later on, one of the graphics that we'll do. But the real intention is if there is deeper issues, to go further on that. And that's what we have even in the manual, we'll talk about it later, how to find a professional person, further. We really believe that's important. But we understood that there were a lot of people that had not started any grief work at all, and we wanted something that could begin that process. And, and hopefully this will help that. So, Dina sounds like she's already been, working through some of that. But for the rest of you, whatever you may have come up with, pursue that further. As it's been said so many times, insight alone does not bring change. There's insight about something, awareness of something, can then cause us to go to those next steps of getting help, talking, doing more about it. Very good. Thank you, Dina. Thank you. Okay, anyone else? Okay. So now we move on to things that you have not had yet. The manual given that. And that's if you'll go, and we're not going to take much time with this because you have it with you. But if you'll turn to page 38, the very next page. So page 38, once again, the intention here is of doing something and then what to do next. So, we identified our sorrow, anger, and grief and guilt. Well, then the next thing was, we need to do something to lighten that load. We need to forgive, let go, be grateful, celebrate. Well, but how do we do that? How do we do that? And so we wanted to put a little bit in the manual at the least of how that is. And there were 4 things that we thought were important for doing that. One of those is, and this fits what, Dina was talking about already. One of those at the bottom there, support of others. It's, the support of others. There's many ways to get this. Again, we said it could just be with a close friend. It could be joining some small group. It could be joining a grief group of some sort, if there are. But just, gaining some support for that. The next one you'll see on page 39, it says prayer. The manual is very heavily grounded in prayer. And as we said before, because we wanted the manual to be not only interdenominational, quote unquote, but interfaith even, in the sense that this could, anybody, that we did not prescribe the prayer. We did not have the prayers begin with an address. So if you can see down the bottom there where it says prayer for help with sorrow, there's a line, you created us with emotions. Well, you put in there, the person reading is supposed to put in there who they're addressing it to, whether it be Father God or whatever you may be comfortable with. But prayer is so important. That we even put a prayer in here for that would come from a not yet believer in anything, right? Because you may be, as I have over the years, sat down with somebody who has no faith at all, and you're trying to work with them through their grief. So as you can see there, it says, to whomever may be listening. And, it starts out, if you are there and can hear me, then you already know that I have not been a big believer in spiritual things or much of a prayer. But I need the kind of help now that it seems only a being far greater than myself or any limited human being can offer. And that might be a starter prayer. You may call it like starter pants or whatever, But that may be for some. And in fact, similar prayers of that I've used over the years with people who said, I don't know, how do I start? I don't know anything about God. I never got taught anything about that or prayer. And I said, you ride a bus to work, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, just lean your head against the window. And I said, keep it inside your head if you don't want people to think you're talking to yourself and not well. I said, no, just put your head against the window and just talk. I said, you don't know, I don't really ever pray to you before, but if you're there, listen, And I said, I believe that God will answer. So anyway, but then we have a prayer for sorrow, there's a prayer for anger, and there's a prayer for guilt. And again, they're just small prayers, but they're meant to be capture the essence of dealing with those things. Now later on tonight, we're going to go over another tool called the Journey of Healing Road, which has a number of prayers, and they're little larger prayers that you'll find cover 6, 7, or 8 pages in the book a little later. And, we're actually going to look at 1 or 2 of those. They can be helpful in addition to this for the sorrow, anger, and guilt. Okay, so if you turn to page 40 then, under the prayer for guilt is counsel. Now, we guess we could have put counsel and support of others together, but we wanted to separate this out and more specifically, counsel from somebody who has ability in that area, whether, professionally or otherwise, clergy persons or, whoever that may be, to get in, intentional help, to, ask them to go with you. And again, you have the manual now, so I encourage you to read through this, section coming up. Take a week. You have your notes and you have papers that you've already been given. But why not go from beginning through? It's 90 pages, might take you a little bit depending on your reading, but it's your book, it's your manual now. Underline, star, whatever you want. But there's a lot of things in here, as you'll see later, additional tools. Lastly, in this section was journaling. And this is something very dear to my heart. I've been journaling, what I call prayer journaling, since 1983, I think it was, my second year of seminary. And, it's just where I just write down things that happened in my life that day, and I always close that with a prayer. The prayer may be, forgive me, Lord, that was so stupid what I said today. Help me not to say that again. Help. Or, thank you, Lord, that was great. That was a great day. Great time last night with the group at GCCC. Whatever it is, it's, but journaling is a way, I feel, and some of you I know do that already, but to get in touch with ourselves. To get, to keep a kind of coherent self, as they say in the psychological world, and I also look back on my journal and see how I was last week or last month, or even last year, and helps get a sense of that. But that can be a help in going through this grief area to put things down. And I put in the, we put in the book there about Captain Kirk, who just went into space again, right? So Captain Kirk, right? What did he say? At the end of every episode, they went through all these adventures, battling the Klingons or whomever, right? And at the end, how did he close? That's right. Captain's log, stardate, whatever it was. And then, to me, it was some of the best part of the show because he, kind of brought things together, and that's what journaling can do, kind of help us, put on paper and get a sense of what's happening in our lives. So, encourage you again to look at this and to consider some of these things to help in doing that. The resistance to journaling I have down here, or logs, or even small groups, or anything else, usually comes, in my experience and experience of others, the resistance of those things usually comes from a deeper resistance many people have to just not sharing. Not sharing, their stuff with other people, but even to dealing with their own stuff inside. Remember my poem that I read in the beginning there? Everybody's grieving something, but pushing it down, that's the way we've been trained. And we have in many senses, and that, there's talking about, not feeling our feelings, as we've been saying. So before we go on to talk about our next tool, Pat is going to come and share, a little bit more about this idea of our feelings and things inside of us.
Hi. In grief, our emotions can come crashing in on us, like waves down the shore that knock us off our feet. That's normal and to be expected. But give them their due. Though they are strong, they are signals too that something has changed in your life. As you make this transition to, in many ways, a different world, strong feelings are part of the story. They can feel relentless. I've found, as many have, that in times of grief, I actually feel a bit better when I stop trying to fight those feelings or push them away. Kind of like in that old Billie Holiday song, "Good Morning Heartache, Sit Down." She wasn't happy that the heartache was there, but there was a resigned acceptance that that's the way things were right then. So we might as well reach out to these feelings and see if there's anything we can learn from them. What are you trying to tell me, loneliness? Maybe that I should reach out to someone. Sadness is certainly telling us how much we love that person or what a loss that was, but also telling us that we ultimately can and will also feel gratitude for having that in our life and for having the capacity to love so deeply, which, by the way, we still have. So maybe think about the predominant feeling you're feeling on any given day. How big is it? Is it as big as a golf ball? As big as a basketball? As big as one of those crab soccer balls we used to play with in gym class? Maybe it's as big as a room or a house, a stadium, a city, a state, the world, the universe. If that feeling had a color, what color would it be? If you compared it to weather, what kind of weather would it be? Get to know the contours of your grief emotions and see how they change over time. I can tell you that in various grief experiences that I've faced, at first it felt like, well, we're in Phoenixville, let's face it, it felt like the blob was coming after me. And especially so for one particularly traumatic grief injury, where that feeling just persisted. And the associated emotions felt huge. Like if I needed a chair for them, it would take a chair the size of, some of those really huge chairs that you see in Lancaster County outside of furniture stores. They're like 10 or 15 feet tall. You could never get them into your house, but that's not what they're for. They're there to advertise that it's a furniture store. Those. That is the size of chair that each of my grief emotions would have needed. But when I started to work with my emotions, with Tony's help and with the worksheets in this manual, and got unstuck from the ones I was stuck in, now those emotions, which felt much larger than me, if they're still around at all, they would fit in a dollhouse-sized chair. Do your grief work. It makes a real difference.
Amen. Amen. I had a friend of mine in high school, and I never thought about it till later, but used to ask him, how you doing? And he'd say, oh, partly cloudy, partly sunny, fair to middling, and I never knew what that meant, but no, fair to middling, partly sunny. Okay, I'm looking at the time, and I think it would be better to take a little break now rather than go to the next thing I have, which we're going to be looking at some things. So how about if we take our break right now, and then we'll come back and look at the next couple sections. Very good. sorry, tonight being a lot of nervous energy. I should remember 44. Yes, let's put that. Okay, we're back. We're back. So, we're moving on now to another major. There's two, I guess, for the want of a better term, major assessment pieces in the manual. The first is that SAG, which we've already gone over, and the next one is the Journey of Healing Road. But in a few minutes, when we talk about the manual, briefly point to the other aspects of the manual. There are other assessments in here, some that are just brief, but that could be used ourselves, but could be used with other people. But this one, once again, we said one of the main things we wanted to do was try to make grief work more easily understandable and more accessible. So we tried, creating a graphic here that can get across some of the concepts. So if you would please look to page 45. And for those of you that are at home, you're not going to see my mug anymore now. For a few minutes, we're going to have you pointed at the Journey of Healing Road. And once again, this will come to you if you're there and you are going to get the manual at some point in time. So, the Journey of Healing Road there. Now, if you take a look at that, at the top there you see Mount Misery. Do you see that? In the middle, right under Healing. And then you go down the road, and at the end of the road you see Mount Joy. Okay, now, does anybody know the significance of those two? Okay. Does anybody do any walking in Valley Forge Park? Do you know where the covered bridge is? Okay, well, those two mountains on either side, and we might not call them mountains like people upstate would call them, they'd call them foothills, so there's a story behind that, and the quick story is that back in the 1680s, or I think it was maybe 1690s, William Penn, and a couple other surveyors were on that mountain. It was apparently a bad day, weather-wise, and they got turned around a little bit. And William Penn was a Quaker, and they didn't use swear words, they tried not to. But it's said that in his frustration, and you can look this up online if you want, I did. In his frustration, William Penn said, "Oh, misery. Oh, misery." And so they called it Mount Misery. Well, they apparently slept there that night, got up in the morning, the weather was a little better, went down the hill, and if you've ever done this, I've done this a number of times, you can park there. In fact, I wanted to take a group once, and maybe we'll do that from GraceCrossing once, and I wanted to take a group to go up the one mountain, Mount Misery, sit for a bit and talk a little bit. Then you have to kind of go back to trail and across the, but anyway, they went down across the river, they went up the other side, and they got to the top of that hill, and from there, they could see the river, and they got their bearings right, and they knew where they were. And what did he say? Oh, joy. So they said, we're going to call this Mount Joy. So till this day, you got Mount Misery and Mount Joy. So we thought we'd build it into our little Journey of Healing Road. So on Mount Misery, we have disappointments, and we have trials, and we have losses that we've been talking about all along, right? Grief wider than just the losses that come. And in the light of those, we've been sharing that there are emotional grief responses that we have from those. So, take a look with me, going down that road. And there's no order to this. This isn't saying this comes first or this comes second or the like. It's not intended to have that. So, right out of the gate, though, there can be relief or trauma. That is intentional, putting that there. Those two things were put there intentional because I know, especially in my work with people with Alzheimer's and families of people with Alzheimer's, there would be the long goodbye, and people would grieve for a long time as they were losing that loved one to their mental state, whatever. It was a very difficult thing to go through. Some of you may have done that with your parents or somebody else. And oftentimes, or even just in general illness that somebody had, but when it comes to the time when the person passed, sometimes, the person felt like, again, maybe you felt like before I wanted the person to stay, for me and for them. But it's been so difficult now, or they're so whatever, that maybe it'll be a relief for that. It's a blessing for them to go, right? So persons have had someone pass or whatever, and they've come to me and they said, Chaplain, I know those steps say I'm supposed to feel anger or depression or this or that, but I feel relief. Is there something wrong with me? And I said, no, there's nothing wrong with you. Am I going to go through those stages later? I said, I don't know, but maybe not at all. If you have been having what they call anticipatory grief all along, you've been letting go, the relief may just be the crossing now of where you're ready to, to put them in God's hands. And so relief may happen, but the other side of relief is trauma, which we've talked about a lot last week, right? Well, we go through a very difficult situation, and now embedded in our bodies, where we said our stress response system becomes impaired. That's another word for injured, right? The event itself, the situation's an injury, but it's even more of an injury because it literally injures our physiological body. It makes our stress response system more reactive, more sensitive, and that can go on for a long, long time. Triggered emotions and the like, and that's where we need help for that. We need help for that. So those two begin, but after that there's fear, there's denial, there's shame, shock and numbness. The brain does that, and that's actually a benefit in the short run. Then there's spiritual doubt some come with. Why did God do this? How many people, I don't know, Madeline Mary O'Hare, right? She's the famous what we say? Famous atheist woman, right? Well, her son, some of you know, has a ministry, a Christian ministry. And he talks about his mom over time. And he says, my mom wasn't always like that. He said, I remember when we were kids, I remember seeing her standing out in the rain, shaking her fist up at the sky. She had some event probably traumatized her in some way that caused her to say, I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore. Or I'm going to make sure nobody else does either. But right before she died, she did an interview. Or before she disappeared, but she did an interview. And then in an interview, she said, many of you don't know this, and I haven't told too many people over time, but every year around Christmas, I sneak into a back of a church because I love the Christmas carols and songs. What's that all about, right? But spiritual doubt can come, and if we don't work with it, it can really take root. Anxiety, sorrow, emptiness, rage, I'm not going to read them all actually, apathy a little later on, loneliness. Then there's confusion and aimlessness. That's what that little hole, that little circle, you see it? You can just go around and around and around. I mean, I know some people, not naming names, but I know some people, you wouldn't know them, so, but the point is that they're in that kind of circle of confusion and aimlessness, and it's been years and years, and it just breaks my heart to see that. And on down a little further, panic, guilt, flashback. But as you can see in the middle of the road, if you look at it, what are the words there in the middle of the road? Does anybody recognize those words? Give, receive, invite. Is that familiar to anybody? What are they? That's our Grieve, right? Again, the models intend to build into this idea that it's by that, giving ourselves time and giving, like it says on the upper right, give it time, but give time to it. Receive, invite, examine, value, expect, and at the end there you see again those 4 tasks of forgive, gratefulness, celebration, and letting go. These models or these resources and tools, they're tied together. We intended the manual to be of one piece. A lot of different resources, but that they all would speak to the same thing. So the concern is not that we would have these emotions, because to be honest with you, and Marion and Pat have brought this out very well in these last couple of weeks, we can't help but have these emotions at some level, right? And they're not all that bad. Denial can be a helpful thing in the beginning. That shock and numbness is actually a very good thing, that we don't feel the weight of all that happened. Right? There's things here that are there. Where's the problem come in? Well, we're convinced, and everybody in the field is convinced that, and this is why it's the road analogy comes in. You ride down that road, you get to denial, you get to shame, you get to anxiety, spiritual doubt. You pull off that road, park the car, pop the trunk, get out the chair, big chair, little chair, whatever chair, get out the chair, get out the tent, and squat there. And some people are squatting at some of these emotions for decades because they haven't grieved it yet, right? They haven't paid attention to it yet, like we've been saying, right? Haven't gotten the help, haven't learned, like Dina said, haven't been able to learn that it's familial and it's family system stuff. There's a lot of knowledge that, that we're gaining on in our society, but a lot of people don't know and need help with. So that's the problem. And to use the word that we've been using all along, and you'll find it in the manual in a number of places, to get stuck there. To get stuck there. And when we get unstuck from that, then we can begin to move on, and find our way to Mount Joy, but at least find our way to more, as we've said earlier in the manual, more energy, more peace, more other things that'll come. Again, the concern is that we would get stuck. But since it's an assessment tool, as well as a teaching tool, what we want you to do is to use this. Now, we're going to take a few minutes here tonight to just have you, in your book, just circle something. Now, it's not ideal, as we say. You'd preferably really need more time. And what we encourage you to do is to take this and as soon as possible, or when you can, find some quiet time and do it again, or do it in a more fuller way. But we want to kind of do it as part of our training. Now, here's a way that we want to use that you can do this particular resource. So, turn to the next page there, page 46. Starting on 46, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many pages of prayers. And those prayers cover almost every, not quite every. I noticed missed a couple. There's not a prayer for shame, but this that I saw. But most of those emotional responses are there. So, what these prayers are intended to do is to give. They got a twofold purpose. They're tended to give a description of the emotion a little bit, in the form of a prayer, to help you decide maybe whether you're stuck there or not. So then the encouragement then is to read the prayer. And then they also, at the end of every prayer, there's also serves as a way to begin to move forward, by way of asking for help to come out of that being stuck. So let's take a look at shock numbness at the bottom of page 46. So it's in I form, first person form, so that when you and I and whoever else reads it, the intention is to read it as if it, we're praying it, or in looking at this to see if it fits, is this me? I am still finding it hard to believe that it happened. I do seem to be in a kind of shock, and my emotions seem to have shut down. So if that's where you're at on something, then that's a clue that shock numbness may be something to circle. Do you understand what I'm saying? And that you may be stuck there. Some tell me this is a good thing, but I know that it can't last too long. I want to feel again, but I'm afraid of what might happen when it all rushes in. I need help to recover and to give myself time to let my mind and body absorb everything. And then the shift moves to the help. It's kind of like Psalm 23, if you've ever read that carefully. In Psalm 23, right, David's addressing his audience, right, whomever, right, in the temple as he wrote for the songs for, right, says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures, and he, leads me beside the still waters, and he restores my soul. It's like talking to you, right? But halfway through the psalm, he changes the direction of his address. I had a rabbi point this out to me once when I was at a service. He changes his address, right? Now he says, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. You are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Right in the middle, he changes the address. And he keeps that all the way to almost at the end. And at the end, he turns back to the audience and says, surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. But that's kind of what this is, It's a description. I feel this. I'm feeling this way. And then it's, help me. Show me. Reading onward here. Help me to get through this. Help me to take one day at a time and to trust that I can be restored. Guide me to people who can help me to understand, right? This is a prayer about the grieving task, right? Help, that I give time to it, that I would receive from others, that I would invite others, and in this very sense, inviting God in. Guide me to people who help me understand what is happening to me and show me how to heal. I need your healing hand in my life. Heal me. Show me what to do next. Hopefully all of us believe that kind of honest laying ourselves before God, they'll answer. That God will answer. And so the encouragement for you, and again, we really don't have as much time to do it tonight, but we want to at least have you, down and look. But at some point in this near future as possible, the encouragement is that you would, and for those of you at home, when you receive the manual in this, next week or so, however we work that out, week and a half or more with the mail, we'll see how that goes, to do that same thing, to, read through and see how it fits you. And as I said earlier about Psalm 139, ask God to search me. Just go with me searching. Chris, please. Yeah, there's no, I didn't make that clear earlier, but there's no sequence to it. The relief and the trauma I said, and flashback at the end, but the rest of them there's no sequence to. No. And thank you. That's it. I want to make sure everybody knows that. Just as we've said before about, and as people who work with the stages, of death and dying that Kubler-Ross put together, and now David Kessler put together a sixth stage of, or fifth or sixth, whatever, of sixth of meaning. But the denial, the anger, it always escapes me when I'm supposed to say them out loud. But people always say, well, do we go through those in order, like step by step? No. I think even Kubler-Ross eventually, afterwards, early on, said, no, that doesn't necessarily happen. Because people used to say to me in hospice, like I said earlier, I'm not angry, I'm not depressed. Is that going to happen to me later? So, well, it may or it may not, but it's not automatic that it'll happen because you're at a stage. The same thing here. These are not stages. We may have one or two or however many of those responses. Put flashback at the end there because it's underneath expect, right? Expect that there may be difficult days and times and we get triggered. And a flashback, if you know what that is, where and I've had a few of those this last year, my trauma situation, where I was brought right back in the middle of the situation, before, and I'm reliving it, and it's in my mind, my head, and it's, you're just all the emotion, because your body still has that. It's carrying it, right? We've been saying that all along. So, what I want to do now, let me see if I had anything else I wanted to say. Okay, yeah. Then, if any one of those fits, then it's possible, not definite, that you may be stuck there, that we may be stuck there. Or maybe we're just, maybe we got the chair and the tent back in the car, but we just haven't quite turned the key and pulled back on the road yet. We just need a little nudge. And sometimes that's what it is. Sometimes we need nudges. Sometimes we really need to get uprooted and from where we've gotten stuck and put our roots down. But, and I mentioned again here is, use your grief experience survey. Keep that with you there, because that's where you checked off things that may be a way to, fit in, where the stuckness, may be. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to take a few minutes, because we're not too far from being done tonight. We're just going to take a few minutes and ask you to just to go down it, just to be, get more familiarized with it, and maybe something will pop out right now, to write that down. And, it was, Nancy last week had mentioned that when she did the Am I a Healthy Griever checkup, I think it was, that she put down where she was before and where she was now. So before she was at a 2 on something, but now she was at a 9. She'd grown. She could already see where that was a growth thing for her. Well, maybe that could be the same to you. So you might want to circle here, not necessarily where you are now, maybe where you were before, and either way, let's just take a few minutes to do that, and then we'll come back. If you do circle one, you might want to move to the prayer for that particular one and see, whether it fits or how much of it fits your own description of what you're feeling. Ruth, is that down on this? Oh. To those of you at home, I know that it didn't work the way we had hoped it would, but again, I'll say, please, when you get this coming up soon, hopefully you remember all that was saying about how to do it here. If not, we can help you on that. Oh yes, thank you. So you can watch again. It's and I say this to everybody or to friends that you have. If you feel this was a helpful thing to you, you might want to encourage people that you know to go to the GraceCrossing website. And I guess, some of you churches could link that over from yours if you wanted to. But anyway, you can take a look at that. And that can remind you what we did that did this. Thank you, Laurie. Okay, I'm sorry to cut it short, but time-wise, we really wanted to keep to our time. And like I said, this is not the ideal way. But I want to start us off, and I'm seeing if anybody wanted to share, but I want to start off by sharing fear. I just looked at it there myself right now. And I guess 4.5 weeks ago, I don't know what it is now, 3.5 weeks ago, I had a heart attack. I had a mild heart attack. And that night, over a couple of days, I wasn't feeling right, but the night that it, I guess, actually happened, pain down my arms, the whole thing, I didn't know what was happening. I thought I was going to die. Now, I, lifted up to God, said, I'm ready, but I hope part of my fear was that my daughter would find me dead 4 years after after her mother passing. So a lot of emotions swirled around that time. And I want to say that I also say sorrow here because I just got a call last week that my brother, he's 74, he's like 8.5 years older than me, he had another stroke, like his 4th stroke in the past 5 years. And he has Parkinson's, he lives out in Johnstown, and my sister-in-law said he's in the hospital and we don't know what's going to happen. Well, he's home now, but when I heard that, it just went on me. Because many of you know I've lost, other family members. And I just thought another one. I was hoping it would be a while before I got that call, So, but those things come to you. But in doing those, we need to do these things. We need to invite and receive and examine. So did anybody have anything that popped out to them as they were going down that they want to share for the good of the group? I know that was a difficult thing to do it in that way. Anyone? Okay. So, but, again, please do this and ask yourself, who can I share this with? Who can be my invited person? For those of you at GraceCrossing, it could be some of the other ones. I certainly would want to be, or, would be open to be that, or Pastor Dan, And, he's, I think, said he's going to be watching online tonight. Hey, Dan. But he'd certainly want to sit with you, or we're going to be looking to have our Healthy Grievers Encouragers team developed. But who else, or maybe it's somebody else that you know. But, that might be a good thing to do, just to share with them. And you share what you want to share or not. That's limited to, what you want to do. Okay. So, all right. So, almost the last thing that we want to do besides just finishing up some, I don't even know what you call them, business things, is we want to just take a couple minutes to familiarize, that's a tough word for me, you all with the manual. And we want to do that by the table of contents. So if you would turn to page 3. So those of you at home, we have that. We're going to have that there, so you can take a look at it. So in some ways, the manual was designed a little bit, or I guess the opposite's true. Our sessions and training was designed a little bit like the manual's direction. So section 1 there That first night, we'd have everybody do the grief experience survey, and you get one in your book too. You can have that. Section 1 there, that the poem that we mentioned, the 7 assumptions underlying healthy grieving, we went over those. You may have your other sheets that you had or PowerPoint pieces. What it means to be a healthy griever, the task. So that first section is all about, what is healthy grieving and what undergirds it? What are the things, the truths and the things that need to be understood for the healthy grieving task? The second section there, doing grief work, examining our injuries. And there we have feeling your feelings. Remember, Pat shared on that. And when we shared, and the night Marion shared the next, and Pat shared on body stress, and then Marion shared on understanding trauma, and then Pat and I added something a little about the stress and the pinball, whatever, and identifying grief. Well, we only gave a little bit those nights. There's a little more in here. And you can always, online or any bookstore, wherever you go, there's so much material out there, really good material. And we have, as you'll see later on, we have a bibliography and suggested readings at the back even. So, and it's only a small one, but it includes some of the things some of the books that we used for this. Next thing was learning not to sag, and we went over that. Journey of healing, we just went over that right now, and understanding and the prayer. So basically those first 2 sections we've gone over, and that was a large part of what the training, the 3 sessions was all about. Now, section 3 is called What's Next on the Journey? And so we have page 53 there said, From Surviving to Thriving, Life After Grief, And that section, which we, encourage you to read this all, but that section will tell you more about encouraging this idea that, it's not just to survive, but to thrive, as you've heard the term, to grow from this, and we can. We can come to a place where we've never been before. Why? Because we're freed from things that were binding us. And when we've been set free, then we're able to fly, right? Chains broken, whatever term in that phrase or analogy, metaphor works for you. The next one, it says, invitation to become a healthy grieving encourager. Again, we've been saying this all along, repeating it, because we really believe strongly that we introduced ourselves, Marion, Pat, and I, that first night as healthy grieving encouragers. Well, there's thousands and hundreds of thousands of people helping people with grief, right? But, we're the only ones who have that term, I guess, right? Because we created that term, right? So we are the initial healthy grieving encouragers. But our whole purpose is to multiply ourselves. We want to see, as we've said, our vision and dream is in every organization, and that's from congregations to hospices to wherever, to every organization, that there would be people, at least 1 or 2 or more, a team would be better, of healthy grieving encouragers in that organization, willing to come alongside of others, not only willing, but ready, trained, using the materials, understanding the resources, having gone through it to sit down and say, this helped me. Maybe this will help you. So, it's an invitation, but it's a challenge there too, for you. So really, really want you to read that. In section 4 there, additional assessment tools to examine your life. You already saw the Am I a Healthy Griever checkup. And as we said before, that's something you might want to do again in 6 months or a year. Maybe do it on the year anniversary of doing this training. October of 2022. Letting grief speak. That's just, it's most of the page is blank. It's about making a written statement of the present state of your grief. That's a strongly thing that's been encouraged. And in fact, as it says in the back there, I forget their names, but in Macbeth, one of the men says to the other men the man who just found out that his wife and children were killed. And, and he says to him, give sorrow words, for grief that doth not speak whispers over the fraught, which means heavy heart, and bids it break. So Billy the Bard said, do that, but it's another tool, another resource. Next thing, Life Challenges Survey. And, maybe we want to turn there quickly, page 59, and then I'll have you have it open and put one finger there and one finger at the table of contents. Sorry, we can't do that at home, but Life Challenges Survey, this is something you use when I was at the state hospital, adapted from a workshop by two women that gave that. It's just a one-page thing that you could give to somebody, right? Take a look at that. That's something that you have somebody who tells you, I'm really struggling. I'm having a hard time. Or you could have a group that gets together and say, hey, everybody, we're just going to pass this around, do this quickly, and let's talk about it. And it's just, again, a self-assessment. I feel physical discomfort and feel like I am suffering most of the time to never. And each one all the way down, anxiety, fear, guilt, loss, despair, confusion. Many of the same emotional responses we've been talking about, because it's all tied in, right? The next thing, and some of you from GraceCrossing will be familiar with this, the discerning the downward D's. I did a message on this about a month or so ago. It's just a resource to trying to figure out, disappointment leads to discouragement, which can lead to depression, which can lead to despair, which can lead to death. And sadly, it has to so many. But this is the tool for helping people identify where they are on that. I've used it with people sitting in a psychiatric ward at local hospitals. I've had them go through that to define where they are. And then we turn to the next page so we can begin to move back up from that using Scripture. Mostly from Psalms and Proverbs. So, please familiarize yourself with that for your sakes or for the sake of somebody else. Another tool, the ACE test for possible trauma from childhood experience. That's, official tool. We've got permission to use that, and that's something that people, looking back to earlier times in life. And that can be coupled with identifying traumatic grief up top. How bad is your injury? It can, help to feel that out. And I think, Dina, that also can be something that would help with the family stuff, going back. So the next section, just further resources we put in here. Tools for healing. Healing for traumatic grief from a Christian biblical perspective. Because the Christian tradition is our tradition, we wanted the whole manual, as we sang in the introduction, to be interfaith or to be used by no faith with somebody, but we also wanted to honor that tradition that's most, dear to our hearts. So we, identified that in a specific situation there. Nextly, additional practices, therapies, and tools for healing. Some of the things that are out there in counseling and otherwise. And then suggestions for finding professional help for grief injuries. And, questions to ask counselors and the like. Once again, I'm encouraging you to look that over and familiarize yourself with that. In the appendix there on page 75, Pat, Marion, and I like to call ourselves traumatic grief injury survivors. We like to say we're thrivers beyond the surviving. But there we have written out our stories in more fuller sense than what we may have shared here. And that's just as an example of how these things work themselves out in our lives. Lastly, there's a quick reference guide to what is a TGI, some of the acronyms that we have throughout the manual, and then the bibliography. I'm having a hard time speaking tonight. It's after 8 o'clock. I shut down at 7, right? A bibliography and suggested readings. Again, just limited. But here you have it. And there you have it. Now, in your hands, and those at home, soon, in your hands. We have been Zooming for a year and a half every week almost. And before that, we met a couple times a week for a couple months before COVID hit to take this from a 29-page to a 92 or whatever it is, page manual, with the hope of having it not have everything. It's not the Oxford Encyclopedia of this or that, but, to be a tool that can help you individually identify perhaps where some things, and to come like Gary, to come to some surprise things, and that just help us along the road a little bit further, right? And if we discover some more deeper things, then that can even bring that up into even more. So at this time, before our absolute final closing, which is where we're going to, encourage you to do, I could even say it now, to do the evaluations. If you haven't done an evaluation, we got 7 or 8, I think it was. So if you haven't done one, we really would like to have you do one for us. It would really help us, in doing our next ones. You don't have to sign your name. So if you haven't done one, and like I said, there's more than 7 here, so, I don't know who, because, nobody didn't have their names, but if you haven't done one, you know who you are, and you're feeling that guilt right now, aren't you? No. Well, there's something you can do about that guilt now. Seriously, we would love to have your feedback on that, and if you don't have that, if you say, I can't find it, we have more out in the lobby there for you. But right now, we're having the right term, turn it over, the Healthy Grieving Commitment Card Ceremony. We're actually going to come around and hand it out to you. You were here, so you get one. Those of you at home, once again, if you send in an email sometime in these next few days letting us know that you've been through watching, and, give us an address, and, we'll get the manual to you, and we'll get the card to you as well. And this is you to keep with you. It says Healthy Grieving Commitment, and then it says, choosing healthy grieving as a lifestyle, I will seek to deal with disappointments, trials, and losses by, and then it has the 6 grieving task. And on the back it has a prayer. And again, address it to God as you will, but you say, God, I trust that you will be my ever-present help in times of trouble, and that you will carry me through the difficult times. For my part, I will rest in your care and not lose hope, no matter what comes my way. Amen. And at the top it says, grief is inevitable, but despair is not. That's our tagline, if you remember. Everybody grieves, but we do not have to despair. Can you get an amen? Amen. There you go. Okay, so we're going to hand this out to you. If you take that side, we'll take sort of the middle back, and then I'll go over here, and we'll see what we got. Okay. Thank you for signing in and getting your card. Keep it with you. It's laminated so that you can hold it. We even made them yellow so that people know. Made them yellow, so bright yellow you have. So, you are now card-carrying healthy grievers. All right? Say that to people. Say to people, that's what I tell people. I say, I'm a card-carrying healthy griever. You're a what? Because they think of card-carrying union or whatever they may think of. And you can bring it out and show them. It would be a great way to bridge into the conversation about having them, be a part of it, especially if you end up having, as I hope we do here at Grace and other places, a group, monthly or every other week group or something where people can come, because we want what? We want everybody to be a card-carrying healthy griever, right? Why not? Why not? Okay, so just closing out here. Evaluations, I mentioned that. Again, if you hadn't done, I don't think we made provision for this out there, but we what we mentioned, if, you ever heard blessing for blessing? You know, so if you wanted to bless future people and give a donation for cover the cost of the manuals, you know, we decided before we started this that we neither have GraceCrossing nor the participants buy the manual. You know, that we would, you know, we actually got a little bit of a grant to kind of help that a little bit. But, you know, going forward in the future, you know, so if you wanted to help us out that way, you could, you know, go online with help, you know, Hope and Help, or tonight out in the lobby. Is there something we can, a basket or something? Laurie, do you have a basket? Something? Laura, get us a basket. So if you want to help out with that, and that's not required, as you know, but if you'd like to, then you'll be blessing somebody in the future for that. All right. So, God's peace be with you, and we're glad you came. Those at home, glad you came. You're a little bit closer to being able to grab a little bite to eat, or you have been doing that. But so, thank you all so much.